Happy Wednesday, history experts. It is rainy and dreary outside, and it's the middle of the week, which means it's not the end of the week, and it's also not sunny, which makes this day bleh. And after watching two grown men fight during the presidential debates last night, I just don't know how to feel about my day. But hey, man, we got through the first couple hours anyway, so I'm going to run you guys through what we did today. If you weren't able to be with us, this will give you the rundown on everything and and go through all the stuff. Quality time together. If you end up needing any help on anything we're talking about today, you're not understanding something, or homework that's due on Thursday is giving you trouble, please reach out to me. I mentioned this in both classes I've had so far, and I'm going to say it in fourth hour today. Some of the teachers have like big time office hours where they're like, I'm going to be online from 1 to 2 or whatever. Guys, I'm here for you all the time. All right. So if you want to email me, chat me, video chat me, text me, I'm here to help. Okay. I want you to do well. Please reach out. Voice was scratchy. All right. Anyway, we're going to go with the presentation for today. I'll try and run you guys through these 3 slides we did in a relatively quick amount of time. But like I said, reach out. Come chat with me. Let me know what's going on. Let me know if you need help. All right, here we go. All right, so I chose a little SpongeBob today because congratulations, you made it through 1 whole month, and hopefully you put pants on every day. I'm a big SpongeBob fan. I would never admit that in real life, but some of my favorite ones are every time he tries to drive a boat, and what is her name? Mrs. Puff has to deal with him. I like her. She might be my favorite character. So some reminders. First of all, I sent out those emails yesterday. If things are going well for you, you got kind of one version, and if things are, if you're struggling a little bit right now, you got a different one that also listed some late work you owe. And that brings me to the next thing, late work. If you owe me anything, I'm still taking it. I'm still taking everything. I'm not being picky. So if you owe me the very, very first assignment, Reconstruction Introduction, and you still want to do that, I'm more than happy to correct it and give you feedback and enter a grade in the grade book for you, man. No questions asked. So make sure that you get stuff in. We're going to have a big quiz on Friday during class. It's going to kind of be our cap off. It's not going to be like the last one where I gave you like all these essay questions. There's going to be some multiple choice and some true and false and things like that. So you will be able to use your notes. So hopefully you've been getting these things down. And if you were gone today, you can get these things down. Last reminder, you've got an assignment due tomorrow by midnight. That's the U.S. versus the Sioux tribe, which is actually stuff that we're going to talk about tomorrow in class. So make sure you're working on that. And again, if you have any questions, reach out. Our discussion today is going to kind of center on what happened to the tribes in the West. We'll kind of wrap that up tomorrow. If you have extra time allotted for history, do some of that work. And again, ask me if you have questions. That goes for your parents too, or if you are a parent watching this. Hey, hi, I waved for some reason like you could see me. But if you're a parent, you're watching this, if you got questions about what we're talking about or things like that, just let me know. Reach out. That's what I'm here for. Okay, so we've got 3 slides to look at, and let's get rolling. Say bye to SpongeBob. Bye, SpongeBob. Bye, pineapple under the sea. Okay, all right. So we're going to start off today by looking at a slide on the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. Now, if you're a historian, and you guys all are, but if you're a big-time historian, you may know that there's more than one Fort Laramie Treaty because several treaties were written between the U.S. government and the native tribes of the West at this time period in history. But we're going to focus in on what was really kind of the first major one between the two sides. And I guess in the plainest language that I can use, this treaty is shady as heck. The U.S. government was definitely trying to get kind of a one-sided relationship going with the tribes where we were letting them know that we were in charge and that they just kind of had to suck it up and deal with whatever crap we wanted to send their way. And so the agreement itself, the U.S. government wants the leaders of all the major tribes in the West to meet at Fort Laramie and kind of threatens their tribes if they don't show up. And so most tribes send their chief and their shaman. Shaman is like a medical religious leader. In some tribes, the chief was the shaman. They kind of shared roles. And so some tribes sent their chief and then like their war chief or their top general with them to the fort. But when the tribes got to Fort Laramie, they were presented with a treaty that the United States had already written up that had 3 major parts of it. There's a lot more to the treaty, but the 3 main parts that matter to us are that the tribes agreed to give up some of their land and not bother white settlers. And so if you imagine like a tribe going, okay, we agree to live in a quarter of the territory we've usually lived in and we'll stay right up here. It's not necessarily the idea of reservations, but it's this idea that they're going to concentrate a small number of people or a large number of people in a small area. So concentrate, not think hard, but to put a lot of something in a small area. And then if they bothered white settlers or something happened, their land would be made even smaller. So the first part of the agreement is that native tribes give up big chunks of their land for white settlers and railroads and gold digging and all those things. But in exchange, the United States would give the tribes supplies and money, or as I like to call it, cash and prizes. Now, the problem is, if you're really thinking, I don't think that money has a very large value to the native tribes. I don't think that the old bill with green paper and George Washington on it has much value to a Sioux Indian in 1851. The supplies, though, it was an interesting part of the deal. Forks, spoons, plates, blankets, all those things that were an attempt to Americanize the Western tribes. Also, if you know anything about history, you know that if there was any kind of disease on that blanket or any of the fabric stuff that was passed to the tribes, they didn't have an immunity to a lot of white people diseases, and so a lot of tribal members died from some of these things. The last part of the treaty is the U.S. agreed to mediate any disputes between tribes. Mediate means to be like the neutral judge that helps decide. And so if student A and student B are arguing in the hallway and there's a Hershey bar in its wrapper, because if it wasn't in its wrapper, that would be gross. There's a Hershey bar laying in the middle of the floor and they're arguing, that's my Hershey bar, that's my Hershey bar, it's my Hershey bar. No, it's my Hershey bar. I dropped it. No, I did. Blah, blah, blah. I paid for it. No, I did. And I walk up and I'm like, hey, I will mediate your dispute. I would go, student A, why is the Hershey bar yours? And they'd tell me their story. Student B, why is the Hershey bar yours? And they would tell me the story. And I would decide who gets the Hershey bar. And the answer is me, because I like chocolate, okay? And I mediated the dispute. A lot of times the mediation that the U.S. did was that they said, oh, we're just going to split you guys up and we'll take more of your land. They more or less intimidated the tribes into signing this. They put them in a situation where they basically threatened them if they didn't sign it. And so most of the tribal leaders of the West signed this. And it gave the U.S. a very lopsided or one-sided agreement with the tribes. Moving along to the first tribe that we're going to talk about. These are going to be the guys that tried to surrender. The Cheyenne, that's Cheyenne, not Cheyenne, not Cheyenne, or I've heard it said a lot of ways, but it's Cheyenne. This is about something called the Chivington Massacre or the Sand Creek Massacre. The Cheyenne lived in an area surrounding Pikes Peak, which is in Colorado. That map is Indian Territory or Oklahoma down in the lower right. So don't get confused and think that that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about Colorado, which would be up here, okay? Now, they lived in the area surrounding Pikes Peak. They lived there for a long time. They moved around a little bit because they hunted buffalo and did some things like that. But gold was discovered near their land in 1859. As part of the Fort Laramie Treaty, they agreed to move into a certain area, and so everything was not great, but it was fine. The settlers were digging for gold. More settlers showed up. About 100,000 settlers showed up digging for gold. And the Cheyenne felt threatened. They were like, wow, there's way too many white people here. And even though we're staying on our little chunk of land we agreed to stay on, they're starting to come onto our land and we don't know what to do. And so the Cheyenne chief, a guy named Black Kettle, no, that is not, parents didn't name him Black Kettle. He had a native name, and that's kind of what it translates to. The Cheyenne chief Black Kettle asked the army for protection as part of the treaty that they had signed. And the army was like, of course we'll protect you. We'll make sure the settlers don't bother you. We will keep them off your land. And if any problems ensue, you let us know they were bothering you and we'll take care of you. And it's not what happened. There were some problems. Settlers shot at Cheyenne Indians, and the army came in and always took the sides of the settlers. And then the army started attacking the Cheyenne. And the Cheyenne were like, you said you were going to help us. And they're like, well, we are, but you're bothering the settlers. Then in 1864, a guy named John Chivington, who was the colonel of the Colorado Volunteers, wrote in his journal that he was going to put an end to the Indian menace. He was going to wipe them away like a disease or something like that. It's crazy talk. And he said that he was going to start with the Cheyenne. And he and his men came across a peaceful village of Cheyenne. Now, if you notice that the word peaceful was in that sentence, it's women, children, and elderly. The warriors and hunters are off doing a buffalo hunt. And so there is no threat in this village whatsoever. Chivington took that as an opportunity to plan an attack against the village. He ordered his men in November of 1864, it was November 29th of 1864, to attack the village at Sand Creek. Black Kettle saw what was about to happen and was like, whoa, pump the brakes. And so he sent an 8-year-old boy with a white flag. White flag means surrender. And the little boy waved the white flag. Shivington's men were like, oh, look, they're surrendering. Yay, we don't even have to go down there. Shivington was like, it's probably a trick. How do you know what that means to them? It could be a battle flag. Let's go. And he gives them an order to kill and scalp all, big and little. Most of his men ride down into the village and follow through on that. Some of his men are like, no, they surrendered. I'm going to sit down right here. I'm not doing anything. Yay to those guys. They did the right thing. But most of the soldiers rode down into the Sand Creek village and they massacred the people that lived there. The elderly people were scalped. That means you take a knife and you basically cut off above the ears and above the eyebrow all the way around, like a skull cap type thing down to the bone. Those elderly people bled to death in terrible pain. They raped and disemboweled the women. They cut or below your belly button and let your guts spill out, and you go into shock and you die a really slow, painful death. And they clubbed the children and the babies to death with their rifles. They killed everybody they could. Some of the women, as they were dying, put their hand in their own blood and wiped it on their children and told their children to hold still and play dead. In total, 450 Cheyenne women, elderly, and children were killed. A couple of days later, the Cheyenne hunting party came back and found just this horror movie where their tribal camp used to be, and they were angry, and so they retaliated. But rather than going after Shivington and the Colorado Volunteers, they attacked peaceful settlers, and there was a slaughter. And then the Army would attack more peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians, and I got another tribe involved. And then the Cheyenne and Arapaho would attack peaceful settlers, and back and forth and back and forth. It went for 4 years until finally in 1868, there was a final slaughter of Cheyenne and Arapaho women and children. And with their populations dwindling, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, they gave up. They were like, we can't do this anymore. They're going to wipe us out. They're going to kill all of our women and children. And then what's the sense? And they were moved to a reservation in Indian Territory, or what is now known as Oklahoma. I was in Oklahoma a couple of years ago. My wife works with Native American tribes and like their healthcare stuff. And we went down into Choctaw Nation down here, and she gave a big presentation. And I learned that a lot of Native people still live in Oklahoma, and a lot of really powerful Native tribes still are there. If you look like the Cherokee, for instance, those are the people that were marched there on the Trail of Tears. The Choctaw and the Chickasaw are really big nations, and the Cheyenne and Arapaho still have land here today. Okay, so they tried to give up. They still got slaughtered and still got sent to reservations. Now, one story that's never sat well with me is the story of this guy right here. That is Chief Joseph and his tribe, the Nez Perce Indians. I'm going to turn my pointer off here. Okay, now, the Nez Perce, that's not what they call themselves. They call themselves Nimipu. I think my pronunciation is probably awful, but it's phonetically, it's what it looks like. The Nez Perce is actually a French word for pierced nose that came from white fur trappers that the Nez Perce helped. The Nez Perce had been a peaceful tribe for almost all of their history. They lived in Idaho. I know some of you guys told me Idaho isn't a real place, but I promise you it's there. They had great history with white people. When Lewis and Clark were mapping the Louisiana Purchase in the early 1800s, the Nez Perce helped them out medically and gave them the supplies that they needed to be able to carry on, along with some guides. When white people came looking for gold, the Nez Perce were like, "Oh, that stuff over there, we'll help you get it out of the ground." They were super helpful. And the government knew it, and the government had a lot of respect for them and for their leadership. In the time period that we're talking about, they're led by a man named Chief Joseph. Now, his name wasn't really Joseph. It translates to thunder rolling down the mountain, which I think is really cool. Okay, it's way cooler than Chris. What's your name? Chris. What's your name? Thunder rolling down the mountain. I like that. I don't know. Joseph wasn't really named Joseph, though. The reason that people called him Chief Joseph is because when he was little, his father, who was the chief, knew his son would become chief, and knew that he would have to deal with white people. And so he sent his son east to go to school. He learned English, to read and write in English. He learned about our history and things like that, went to high school, went to college. And then when he graduated, he came back to the Nez Perce people to one day lead them. His father started to get old and got sick. And when his father was on his deathbed, he called Joseph in and said, "Son, you're going to take over the tribe. And I know you're going to do a great job and be a great leader, but I have this one thing that I want you to promise me." Joseph's like, "Dad, whatever, I will do the best I can. Please let me know what you want." And he said, "Don't ever let white people have our land." And Joseph was like, ugh, because you can't look at someone on their deathbed and be like, "No, can't do that. Sorry, bro. No, my bad." Instead, he says yes. And Joseph is tormented by knowing that that's probably not going to be the way the world is going to work. Not too long after this, Joseph takes over. He's doing a great job as leader. More gold gets found on the land. Oh no, I face palmed. As soon as gold gets found on land this time, more white people start to show up. Joseph and his people are like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. Joseph knows they're in a lot of trouble. And then railroad surveyors showed up, people that wanted to build a railroad through the middle of Nez Perce territory. Joseph knew this basically meant that that was the end, and he wasn't going to be able to keep his promise to his dad. And then the U.S. government showed up and made a request. Now I'm gonna turn the camera off here, and I'm gonna tell you